All right. Well, hopefully everybody is ready to go here. It's 2 after the hour, so we will get started. So, hi everybody. Welcome to Low Carbon High Impact Reduction Strategies for today. I am excited to let you know that this is the first PPAI webinar that you have the opportunity to get credit for towards those covetable PPAI advanced certifications. So you'll need to stay until the end and scan a QR code that will take you to a survey. You'll fill that out. That is live today only. You will need to be a rostered employee of a current PPAI member company and have your myppai.org PIN. If you don't have a personal login, there will be a link for you to reach out to your PPAI account manager to get that sorted from the survey. Don't worry, if you are watching this as a recording, you can still access the credit. We will have this up on PPAI Advance in the near future, and you'll just have to take a quiz. Weirdly, they don't want me stressing you all out with a live quiz today. So quick introduction, I'm Liz Wimbush, PPAI's Director of Sustainability and Responsibility. I am the first in the role. I live in California, and prior to joining PPAI in 2023, I was the VP of Supply Chain and Sustainability at Genumark, one of the largest distributors in Canada. I love sunshine on my face and how green plants are in the spring and dry humor. Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Everybody, welcome to our little webinar, and glad to be here, Elizabeth. My name is Mike Smith. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Aclymate. We are a business service member of PPAI and a proud member of the promotional products branded merchandise industry. Previous to founding this little company, I was involved in tree planting for carbon offset production, and previous to that, I used to fly jets for the U.S. Navy. So a little bit of a zigzag career, but happy to answer questions about any of it. Primarily today, it should be about sustainability, though.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We're excited to have you here. So before we dive in, here's a quick overview of what today's webinar is going to look like. I will cover PPAI resources and initiatives at the top. Then we'll go through high level what carbon accounting is, why it matters, and what reduction looks like in practice. Mike has a great 3-tier strategy framework for you all as a takeaway, followed by some specific examples and steps you can take to start your reduction journey today. We'll leave time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop questions as they come to you in the chat, where my fabulous colleague Josh will be collecting them for us. All right, so first, what is PPAI doing in this area? I am happy to report that we are continuing to work with Aclymate to measure and offset our 3 signature conferences in 2026. So for the last 2 years, we've worked with Mike and his team to gather primary data from staff and attendee travel, emissions generated on site, what we ship to and back from our events. Aclymate uses emissions factor data to fill in any blanks, and we get a nice shiny report that I will share more about on the next slide. That details the emissions generated by each event. We then work with him to select the offset portfolio that we believe has the best combination of both short and long-term positive impacts. So far, across 2024 and 2025 events, we have offset 827 tons of CO2e. This handy graphic from the CNOT portfolio page gives you a sense of what the equivalencies are of those numbers. If you've been to any session I've given, you may be familiar with my love of QR codes, so I didn't want to let you down. Here's your first one. Scan this to check out the full portfolio page that goes into detail on what offset projects we've backed. I do want to note the primary goal of carbon accounting is reduction, and with that in mind, we do a lot of work in the background with our operations and events teams to make sure that we maximize those strategies. One fun change this year, if you head to the registration page for both of the events that are now live, NALC and WLC, you'll notice on the housing page for both that we've given you some transit options that will drastically minimize your carbon footprint getting to and from the event, even just for transport from the airport to the hotels. So a few more resources to highlight for PPAI members. Using your myppai.org login, you can access our new learning platform, PPAI Advance, where our PD team has been hard at work adding additional sustainability-related courses. So first, CAS 330. This is an in-depth course covering carbon accounting for the merch industry. And then our just newly released CAS 332 covers climate reporting fundamentals with your friend and mine, Mike Smith. Finally, go ahead and bookmark ppai.org/sustainability for future reference. It is my favorite page on our website. It's a great place to answer sustainability-related questions, starting with a definition of the word for our industry, through to glossaries, guides, white papers, and even a newly published PPAI standard sustainability data template. This is where you can also access the full report on the carbon measuring of our 3 conferences, as well as the waste-free event report from Mandalay Bay, which details how much of what we diverted from landfill while putting on our industry's Super Bowl Expo. All right, now the fun part. Handing it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, great introduction, Elizabeth. Appreciate it. To get started here today, we're going to be talking about ways that you can be reducing your footprint. But before we can kind of really get into that, we should also just do a quick review of what carbon accounting is. And it's kind of the start of the process. As a reminder, carbon accounting is broken down into scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3, and they measure greenhouse gases across your entire portfolio of operations. It's worth it remembering that these greenhouse gases not only are just a theoretical number, it also is an indication of your level of risk in exposure to future operations. High emissions operations are putting themselves at risk. Operations that are working to reduce their emissions footprint are reducing their risk and building themselves strategically for the future. Scope 1 are all the things that you can directly control. You are the source of the emissions, whether that's the gas that you're burning in your furnaces or gasoline in company-owned vehicles, escaped emissions associated with refrigerants coming from refrigeration systems or from air conditioners. It can even be, if you were like a winemaker, the carbon dioxide associated with the fermentation of wine. Obviously doesn't apply to this industry, but just all the ways that the things that you directly control puts gas into the atmosphere. Scope 2 is, I like to think of it as, is like you control the machine, but you don't control the power. You get to turn the switch on and off. The computer that I'm speaking to you on, I get to decide whether it's on or off from a business perspective, but I don't get to tell Excel Power here in Colorado how to generate that electricity for me. For 99% of applications, that purchased energy is electricity. For some kind of specialized manufacturing, it might be chill water or district steam. So there's that. Scope 2 does break down into market and location based. If you're curious about that, we can have a separate conversation. I'm willing to talk about it. Scope 1 and Scope 2 are kittens. Scope 3 is a tiger. So it breaks down to 15 categories. 8 of them are being the upstream emissions, 7 of them being downstream. You don't control the machine. You don't control the switch. The only thing you control is the business decision to engage in that behavior. So for most promotional products companies, those upstream emissions are heavily associated with the embodied carbon into the products that you're buying. Downstream, it may be in the use and the disposal of the products that you're selling as well. So you have a lot of decisions there, but the thing about this is those decisions are primarily focused on kind of business structure and relationships. We're going to kind of get into those details in here. The other thing I want to point out here is a measurement slide, please, is really only step 1, and that's because when you think of like what your organization should be doing, it's kind of a 3-step process, and you shouldn't skip the steps. The first one is that you need to measure. The second one is you need to reduce, and the third one is you need to offset. So measurement is the first step, and the reason it's the first step is because you can't really know where you're going unless you know where you're at. As a sailor here, like in Dead Reckoning, if you're going to steer a certain direction, you better make sure that's the right direction to steer. And you can't really know where that is unless you have a pretty good estimate of where you're at. So measurement is the first point. That's what we're happy to help everybody with here at Aclymate and beyond. The next step, though, is reduction. It's the primary thing that we're talking about here in this presentation, and we'll be going through that. Reduction, you can think of as thinking big to small. There's strategic actions, there's operational actions, and then ultimately there's tactical actions. Tying back to maybe my naval background, which is I think about strategy, operations, and tactics fairly often associated with that. And then finally is offset. Your organization has responsibility for the emissions it's putting into the atmosphere, whether we want to admit that or not. You should be offsetting the remainder of your footprint. There is lots of discussion around offsets. As I mentioned previously in my career, I was a guy that planted trees for offset production. So I will talk to you until you're blue in the face about offsets, but it won't be today. The other thing I would say here is with offsets is that by offsetting, you are internally building a budget for your organization for emissions reductions activities. Because if you're not spending the money if you're spending money to reduce emissions, and you're avoiding the spending of money on offsets. So building a budget for offsets, I think, is a valuable practice. The final thing I'd say on this slide is that as we switch to the next slide is that it's really a repeated process. Even though I talk about it as measure, reduce, offset, it's a cycle. You should be measuring, then reducing, then offsetting, and then going back to measuring what your new reduction is and thinking of new ways to reduce and then moving to the offset. Okay, moving to the strategic here. The first thing is carbon reduction. It starts at the leadership level. This is not just a thing that you assign to somebody. This is infrastructure that you're building in order to set your company up for success. And that means that it has to be cross-functional, it has to move across the departments. It needs to be both inward facing and outward facing. And that requires leadership. Leadership needs to get bought in. If you're not in the C-suite, if you're on this presentation, then you need to go get your C-suite and get them into watching this presentation later. This is how companies set themselves up for success. We live in a carbon constrained world. The more that you are investing in selling into high emissions activities and products, the more you're setting yourself up for failure. And not to put too fine a point on it, but this is in increasing pressure. There's a reason that PPAI dedicated resources into hiring Liz, and why they're continuing to push this through the responsibility summits, because they're looking around the corner and they're seeing where the threat is coming. Some members in this industry even call this existential. So not to be a little too on the soapbox here, but do pay attention to that. Within that leadership level there is you should be setting some ambitious yet achievable reduction targets. Again, this comes after the measurement part, so you should know where you're at and what you can be doing there. You need to be tying sustainability to revenue growth. You will be surprised at how often when you talk about emissions and emissions reductions activities and sustainability to certain core customers, especially at the distributor level, that they're going to value that. Those RFPs, as it's indicated here, will differentiate your offering. And the more that you tie sustainability towards revenue, the more of a positive feedback loop that you are generating. Leaders that understand feedback loops should be looking for that. You need to be focusing on those high impact emissions categories. For most promotional products companies, that's the embodied footprint in the products that they're selling. And they need to be looking at that. Shipping is also a key one there. You need to be tying this to your brand. There are some great examples within the promotional products industry of brands taking leadership there. And then with all things, don't tell me what your goals are, show me what your budget is. And so if you haven't at least set some time and resources to achieving success, you're just pretty much not doing it. And so, do that. The last thing I'd say here is that for suppliers, make sure that you are integrating this reduction into your sourcing and your production. You are, in many ways, not just sustainability, the critical link in the promotional products industry, and you have outsized influence on being able to be able to create benefit for the industry as a whole. Slide, please. So speaking of that, where you source really does matter. And this is part of that leadership component of like looking out. This is the first strategic lever for you to be thinking about. Key sources of emissions come from like the countries that you're sourcing from. Certain electrical grids are much dirtier than others. And so if it's 100% renewable versus 100% coal, you're going to see a very different footprint associated with that. In reality, there is no such thing as 100% of either, but you can get pretty close. You'd be surprised in certain there. Material inputs and processing methods matter a lot as well, right? Sourcing is ultimately, as we all know, is kind of a question of design and a question of procurement. So, you know, the design part we'll talk about here in a minute, but like in the procurement, if you have to get steel, for example, who are you sourcing that steel from? What does their emissions footprint look like? Again, the big insight here is that the majority of emissions in promotional products live upstream in the supply chain. This is where you have some power in order to be able to change that. And this is where your sourcing decisions can drive the biggest impact. Your reduction opportunities there to shift to those lower carbon suppliers that can verify their practices. Liz and I are working to make popular the idea of proof over promises. So they should be providing that proof. And if they can't prove it, it ain't real. So look at that. Consolidate the supplier base for efficiency in some cases there. So you need to be rewarding the folks that are doing the right work. And so that has a feedback loop even outside of your company, which is that if the companies that are doing the right things when it comes to sustainability and emissions are cleaning up, you give them more business, it will drive the others to get their act in gear. Because of the shipping footprint there, nearshoring when economically feasible is something that you should be thinking about. The U.S. grid is okay. It's from its emissions standpoint, it obviously could be better. Within the United States, there are better versus worse as well. Happy to talk to you if you have questions about that. And then, of course, prioritize vendors using renewable energy. Not only does that have like an emissions footprint reduction for you, that also helps to drive behaviors in other vendors engaging in renewable energy practices. So where you spend your money matters. It will drive behaviors. If you put certain, constraints on where you spend your money, then you will also drive certain behaviors. Slide, please. The other side of it is what you sell, the design part of it here. So there are products that have like really high impact within the various categories of the promotional products industry. So, apparel can be fairly high intensity. There's a lot of stuff associated with the production of cotton there. It's a little bit better for polyester, but then you do have the question about microplastics. So thinking about that. Within hard goods, plastics and metals require energy-intensive extraction and processing. You can really mitigate a lot of that by changing the materials associated with that, moving to recycled. The example I think about on the design here is does it have to be steel or can it be aluminum? Aluminum is pretty much infinitely recyclable and it's a much lower emissions when it's in its virgin state. If it has to be steel, does it have to be virgin steel? Can you go to recycled steel? Again, recycled steel is a much lower emissions footprint associated with that. Just think about the components that go into it and don't make assumptions. One of the things that I think is important for the promotional products industry is to move away from low cost items. I think this is part of the existential threat, which is that if the industry continues to be kind of viewed as swag or schlock, then people are going to want to move away from it. When I talk to people that I know and I tell them about how I really enjoy working with the promotional products industry, about half of them are just like, oh, really? And I have to be like, no, no, no. Let me tell you about actually how many leaders there are in this industry that are doing amazing things. And they're really moving away from swag, that stuff. There's a lot of stuff. There was a report that PPAI helped to author that talked about the emissions footprint of a product. You shouldn't think of it necessarily in absolute, but you should think in an emissions footprint per impression. And I believe that. The more that you are replacing somebody buying something else and that they're attaching a long-term value to that product and to the brand that's emblazoned upon it, the better you are serving your customers and the better it is for the planet. I would also talk about electronics here. So one of the downstream categories associated with that is the energy consumption for use of the product. And so if you're selling a battery pack, every time it gets charged, you're effectively also having a downstream scope 3 emission associated with that electricity. So think about that. Strategic reduction approaches, obviously pick those materials that we talked about, steel versus aluminum, recycled versus not. Can it be bio-based, recycled? The more you can build circularity in, the better. Do design for longevity, like we talked about. The more it gets used, the lower the impact per impression is. Think about packaging a lot. If it just gets thrown in the landfill, you're buying that footprint. But the flip of that is pardon me just a second. Little tickle in my throat there. Part of what you need to be thinking about there, though, is that if you send a broken product, then it's all wasted emissions. So make sure you have the right amount of packaging that it gets there in one piece, but that the packaging is not superfluous. And then do think about lower carbon options at various price points. So let's move for that. Slide, please. Big opportunity for promotional products is shipping. And this is something everybody knows. Thankfully, it's also really nicely aligned with kind of the price incentives there. It is cheaper for you to ship certain ways than others. Typically, the cheaper the way to ship is also the lower impact way. Fun factoid, air freight is as much as 50 times higher emissions per mile as other forms of freight, such as like shipping by ocean. So this is, pardon my coarse naval nature here, but we had something known as the 7 Ps, which is that proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. So if you want to talk to the C-suite without using piss, then feel free and just call it the 6 Ps. But nonetheless, good planning here prevents high expense, and it also prevents high emissions. So avoid that rush shipping. Make sure that you're thinking out. Help your customers stay ahead of the problem if you're a distributor. This is how by the way, it's better customer service. You're going to, build better brand and customer and help them to save money and to show them stay ahead. This is really kind of on the customer service side of things. It will reduce your emissions. It will reduce costs to the customers. Just work on that. And then, as we discussed with the suppliers, wherever possible, that shipping mode has a major impact. The general rule of thumb is the larger the vehicle that touches the surface of the earth, the lower the emissions footprint. If you can ship it by sea, do that. By barge, do that. If it's going over land, then try by train. If you can't do it by train, then by truck. But last case, obviously, is by air. It's just a really high emissions way of doing things there. The other thing to be thinking about here is sometimes the air shippers will say, well, we can engage with you in an offset program. Remember that offsets and emissions reductions are different sides of the ledger. Your emissions reductions, your emissions are liabilities, your offsets are like assets. And so just by offsetting it doesn't make it better. You can't take that off of your balance sheet when it comes to what your footprint is. So think about that. If you obviously offsets are important, we would help you to engage with that here at Aclymate if that's what you're interested in. But don't just think that because I've offset it's gone away. Not the case. It is they're separate parts of the problem. Slide, please.
Before I go to the next slide, I just want to jump in really quick and mention this is such a good opportunity for distributors when you're talking to your clients and trying to get them to plan earlier. Like it's the eternal struggle that, you get the call, oh, I forgot, we have an event in 2 weeks. What can you do? This is something if you have sustainability conscious clients that you can really use that metric, like up to 50 times more emissions for air. If you're letting us work with you earlier in the process, we can make sure that you're getting a significantly reduced carbon footprint for your merch. So I just wanted to jump in and add that.
Love that ad, Liz. So we talk a lot about scope 3, and there's some planning that can go into that and some decision making that's important. But moving into the operational, you actually have direct control over some operational emissions. So your scope 1 and 2, you control. You own the machine. You have the switch. You can do different things. They're often smaller. We tend to see this a little bit higher in the suppliers for obvious reasons, because they tend to, have more warehousing and facilities that way. But everybody has, for the most part, has some scope 1 and 2 emissions, and you can and should do something about that. The first one is wherever possible, try to source renewable electricity. If you have the facility, put the solar panels right on the roof if you can. If you can't, then work with your power company to source, renewable source electricity from them. And you can do that. That moves into more of a market-based method. If you can't source it through the power company, then work with us or some other rec provider that can help you with that. Oftentimes, even the renewable electricity that you'd be buying from the power company, you can get a little bit cheaper with a specific rec provider like Aclymate. Happy to advise you on that, even if you do business with somebody else. I just want to see you doing the right thing here, folks. Efficiency, like this should be like a no-brainer in your facilities. This is a win-win when it comes to reducing the operational expenses of your facilities. Obviously, we got to make the money kind of work out a lot of times, but if it becomes a tweener, use sustainability to help push them over the edge. So think about the operational expenses of continuing to do this versus the CapEx of improvements. You might be blown away with like some of the really low cost ways that you can improve efficiency. One manufacturer that we work with, they had a facility in the southern United States that needs a lot of air conditioning because it's the South. But they also needed hot water for some of their facility operations that they were piping around. They hadn't insulated the pipes, and so they were losing heat from the pipes into the air conditioned facility, and so they were losing energy kind of three ways. They were having to spend more energy in order to produce the hot water. They were losing some of the energy into the air conditioning systems, and then they were having to run the air conditioning. And so, more in order to achieve that. Like foam at Home Depot is cheap, right? So think about efficiency. That's kind of your first and lowest hanging fruit in a lot of ways. Energy audits are available. We are talking about building out some capacity within our organization. If you have any sort of mobile equipment, whether it's delivery vehicles or cars or forklifts, think about electrifying them. Forklifts, for example, a lot of times run on propane because they want to be able to, breathe indoors, but it still is an environmental hazard to have higher degree concentrations of carbon dioxide associated with that. You're having to increase ventilation associated with that, which means that you're consuming more energy, both in the air conditioning and in the breathability. None of that's good news. You should just electrify it. They're a great use case for electrification. And I was trained as an engineer. It is also a more efficient use of energy. So you're going to win all the way around on a lot of those electrifications. You can also, just reduce noise pollution. There's just a lot of goodness that happens with electrification there. Finally, waste reduction. The stuff this is not necessarily a scope 1 or 2 because you do, as it goes to landfill, it is a scope 3 sort of thing. But when it goes to landfill, it will sit there and decompose. In the absence of oxygen, it'll produce methane. Methane is somewhere between 23 and 80 times as bad to the climate, depending on your time scale. So that's not good. And, in the name of efficiency, waste not, want not. So the less stuff that you send to landfill, generally, the better it is. If it is something that you aren't able to reuse, or if you can't reduce it, then you should try to reuse it. If you can't reduce it, then you should recycle it. So that will be beneficial. Compost is also something to look into here as well. Happy to talk about that. Slide, please. The next operational lever that you can pull here is around vendor engagement. You really can't reduce what you haven't tracked associated with this, and you got to be tracking what your vendors are doing there. And so, we've got our little infinity sign to show you that this is an ongoing, continuous process. And so you should be asking your vendors about like what they're doing. If nothing else, it costs you nothing. It costs you nothing to send them an email that says, "Hey, what are you doing?" You are sending them a signal that you care. Just that alone will get something going. That's better for the planet than just being like, "I should send an email." So just send the email. Kind of the next step associated with that is that you should be encouraging them to disclose what their footprint is. Um, their whatever you're using for carbon tracking, a lot of those systems, including ours, have the ability for you to ask through the software to be able to do that. If you're not using software, this is a process that you can do manually as well, and you should. The next layer out there to kind of show them is that you care about this is you should be including this in your RFPs, which means that you are also continuing to kind of send that signal about how this needs to go. But then the ultimate is about how you need is to work with your supply chain. We are all part of supply chains. We all have felt that pressure when some company says, "Hey, do this for me," and you're like scrambling, right? And that's not a very great feeling. Industry leaders in promo know that the best way to do that is to have a nice, tight working relationship with your suppliers, and where the suppliers also know that they have a good relationship with their sellers, whether you're at the distributor or the supplier level in promo. So a collaborative approach, works well. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we need to go far. So there's that. Now, for that said, once you start collaborating on it, feed it right back into it. Continue to ask about the practices. What you've worked on this one particular part of sustainability or climate. Feed it back in. Start showing the signal that not only are we content with where we've gotten, but that we're going to keep pushing and moving forward because emissions reductions is a continuous goal. If you're not at zero footprint, you still have residual risk. So best practice for that engagement, do start with questions, ask them about their energy mix, material sourcing, et cetera. Move from that into like setting clear criteria. I think we've all experienced like that awful, like ambiguous question of like, how can you do this? Like help to tell them like what your goals are and how you would like them to align. So that way you can get aligned. One of the things I see in sustainability that always frustrates me is that because people are afraid of being accused of greenwashing, they often go into green hushing, which is say that they avoid talking about it at all. I would say that the climate generation of Gen Z and millennials, they actually really reward transparency. If you are failing but trying, that's much better than making a claim or not making any claim at all. So live your life in public. And do that associated with your emissions footprint. Share that learning as much as you can. And then the last one there is the collaborate, don't penalize. It's you build a more productive business relationship when you're offering carrots instead of sticks. Slide, please.
Progress over perfection, always.
That's right. I love it. We talked a little bit about packaging earlier. We're moving into kind of the tactical level here. Think about the various materials that you're using in that packaging, whether it's going to be virgin FSC, certified paper products. If you have to go virgin, recycled's better. Associated with that, bio-based means that you're leaving it the open opportunity to be recycled and or composted. When I said composted, I think I sounded like a Canadian. Liz, you're rubbing off on me. Do you think about that packaging reduction that like we talked about there? Use minimal poly bags. Do you really need a poly bag? For most things, no, you really don't. Recyclable or compostable materials there. And then quality over quantity. We all understand like the importance of it, like having like that nice presentation. But I think we've also seen like the really nice presentation that you can get from things that are reusable. This picture here, I think that's actually a pretty nice presentation. I would personally be pleased to receive something like that in the mail. It's the only problem with is it's too much packaging for that little bottle. That notwithstanding, like, it's highly recyclable, it's compostable. Like, look at that. Um, and then, like we talked about with the product side of things, there, the most sustainable product is one that actually gets used. And I've been seeing, as somebody that approached the industry kind of from the outside before I, have fully become a member of it. This is what I really like to tout in the stories of when people are like, "Oh, you're working with promo." Is the stories about like how leaders in this industry are really thinking about brand, and about like how, um, if you start to think of these more as like gifts rather than swag, where people really attach meaning to the product, they keep it. Um, you know, s- a lot of times where those like the logo actually may be really small because it means that somebody's going to keep that blanket on the back of their couch, but they're going to see that little logo for years. Really think about the like products and how you can make sure that they're getting used. The other part about that, and I haven't mentioned it, is if it's going to break, it's going to break. So don't sell them things that'll break. Durable products are valuable as well. Get away from the cheap schlock. Get away to something that lasts, and make sure that it's attached to like a gift. Slide.
I just want to add a good callback here to the last webinar that I was on for PPAI on packaging EPR, which is extended producer responsibility. So there are 10 states right now with laws coming online that will really start to incentivize you to minimize the single-use plastic in your packaging shipping into those states. There's a reward for biodegradable recycled content. So it's just one of those ways that efforts in one area, like carbon reduction, can really parlay into efficiencies somewhere else where you're reducing your compliance risk, essentially.
Here's where things start getting a little wacky, and this is why leadership's important. Um, your clients, everybody, with a few exceptions, everybody cares about sustainability to some degree, right? Most of us don't want to leave a negative impact on the planet, but we're also like hurried and busy, and we have a lot of different concerns. How is this going to make my boss feel? What's going to be the cost, etc. The person that can most impact your client's decisions are your sales staff. Okay, they need to be educated in sustainability and climate more broadly, or more specifically, I should say. Help them to understand what the opportunities are. Also, try to make it so that way they give some sort of incentive if you can associated with that. Help sell sustainability. Your company is the you get to educate your customers in so many ways. Sustainability should be one of them. Part of that should be presenting carbon conscious alternatives. So if you know that one mug comes from virgin steel and another one's recycled aluminum, like, try to present that. Um, Same sort of thing we talked about with the planning before. Be proactive. Make sure that your sales staff is not just trying to hit numbers, but is actually trying to make sure that you have a great customer experience and minimize costs and shipping, in order to reduce those emissions there. Really, as Liz talked about there, explain those freight trade-offs. Yeah, I can ship it to you by air. It's 50 times the footprint and 4 times the cost. But maybe we can plan a little further ahead and make that work there. Help them also to understand about life cycle thinking, right? Which is that the natural tendency of somebody that's busy and probably interacting with promo is like, what's the cheapest possible solution here? But cheap that goes straight to landfill means that you actually have few engagements with a brand, and what you're really doing is brand fill, right? The last thing you want to do is to have your stuff, taking a picture, have the customer's logo shown in a landfill or on some poor kid in the developing world, right? Like, that is not accretive to brand value, and you need to execute the excuse me, you need to educate please don't execute your customers. You need to educate your customers on how to best execute on the problem here. So when sustainability becomes part of your value prop, it's going to differentiate you. And that's an important thing that will help to build brand value for your company as well as for the customers. Slide. Do you think about events? You'd be surprised with how big an event emissions footprint can be. We do work with some consultants in this space that are specifically around that. If you're hosting a major event, there's a huge amount of footprint associated with thrown away carpet every year. So if you're hosting some sort of big event, you think about that. But even small events or smaller events, when you're having your company get together, et cetera, if you have people flying from all over the place, try to keep it where people have to fly the least. That can really help associated with that. And then when you're doing some sort of campaign, this is something that the industry has been working on anyways, which is print on demand and right sizing the quantities associated with it. You really want to avoid, waste. Again, not valuable to the customer if they're buying too much and then it's going into the garbage or, to the developing world. As always, reduce those single-use items, especially the plastics, and then try to think about consolidating your shipments to the venues, and again, using it in with enough time in order to do the lowest emissions route associated with that. As always, track and improve this over year. This is a big opportunity for you in promo. You are the experts in this, and you can help to educate your customers. One note about offsets, though, again, this is the third step, not the reduction side of things, and we shouldn't conflate the two. So look on that, but they do play a legitimate role in part of your climate strategy. Again, after measurement and reduction. The commonly listed cases here: hard to eliminate supply chain emissions. We live in the world that we live in. There are not electric ships that can haul it. So even if you're doing it by ship, it still has emissions. That's a really hard to abate emission. So look at that. Or residual emissions while reduction infrastructure is kind of developing is there. And then, you can also help your clients with their carbon neutral commitments. It's worth pointing out, just to make sure everybody's real clear on this, carbon neutral does not equal net zero. Net zero is the process of emissions reductions with offsetting your residual footprint. If you want, it's carbon neutral is better than nothing, but it is skipping that middle step. You're just going straight from measure to offsets. The most important, the link in that chain that we showed at the beginning there is the reduction side of things. But if customers have made carbon neutral commitments, again, it's better than nothing. Try to encourage them to do that. You can help them with the offset side of things, but also try to encourage them into going beyond carbon neutral. When you're looking at offsets, you want to make sure that you're working with verified offset projects. They by recognized standards. My personal favorite is Gold Standard. My second favorite would be Climate Action Reserve. So there's that. Vera's gotten some bad news about that. So I'm happy to advise you if you're looking for offsets. You can also be looking for offset portfolios. Liz indicated like PPAI is working with CNOT, which is a trusted vendor partner of ours. Transparent reporting is here. So make sure you got the documentation about that. Offsets live on a registry. You should be able to point to every offset that your company purchased and consumed, and you should be able to show that. So part of like CNOT, for example, they have, if you ever go to that page, is you can link directly to every one of the offset registries for every offset that was retired on behalf of PPAI. And then honest communication, avoid greenwashing by clearly stating what you're doing to reduce versus offset. Carbon neutral can start to border on greenwashing a little bit there. So make sure you're doing the emissions reduction side of things first there, but just be real honest about it. Again, the climate generation prioritizes authenticity and transparency and honesty over bold claims that are not backed up. Again, just as we're kind of coming to the close here, happens in 3 phases, and then within the which is measure, reduce, offset. Within reduction, that happens at 3 levels: strategic, operational, and tactical, big to small. Emissions reduction strategic starts at the top. You need to have leaders that are driving you towards, thinking about the way that your products are designed, your supplier selection, looking at making a corporate reduction goal, and then thinking about where you position yourself in the market. When you get to the operational level, you need to be thinking about process improvement. That includes scope 1 and 2 associated with your own operations, vendor engagement programs, internal capability building, and then moving to the tactical, where you have daily decisions being executed by your team, and that those teams are well resourced. Back to the strategic side of things, those teams are making decisions on product design, informing the customer and educating the customer and how to move forward, and that you're optimizing at order level. You have to get all three levels aligned if you're going to find success. And if you do find success, then you will be not only insulating yourself from future risk, you will also be establishing yourself as a brand leader in the climate economy that is growing. Okay, again, so 5 practical first steps. 1, identify your top emissions categories. Those should be pretty obvious if you've done the measure side. If you haven't done the measure side, I'd be happy to help you. 2, choose one strategic lever. You don't have to, eat the whole elephant, at once. Just take a bite. Maybe a less violent or aggressive tone, which is to say is that the only way to start walking down the path is to take a step. So pick one strategic lever that you're going to pull within leadership. Within that, you should be able to pull one operational lever, whether it's freight consolidation or vendor engagement or something. Just pick it and get going. Empower your sales team. This is where the rubber meets the road. They are the face of your company in so many ways. Make sure that they know about sustainability and are able to execute upon it. And then don't forget that chain feeds back on itself. You need to be measuring ongoing at least annually. If you're doing it by spreadsheet, software systems should be able to help you kind of keep this going, and you should be looking at that. I know at Aclymate, when we tend to focus into quarterly business reviews. That seems to be about like the right period to make sure that we're feeding back in there. But as Liz talks about right there, progress beats perfection. Just get moving. Start somewhere, learn fast, and build from there. So I appreciate everybody taking the time there. My contact information is here. I'm happy to help you all with carbon accounting, climate, sustainability. If you want to talk about fighter jets, I can do that too. So there's that. Mike at acclimate.com. You can help us there. Again, we're a proud member of the promotional products industry. We really enjoy being able to help all of our brethren within this space to be able to start making climate adjustments and improvements. And even if there's not a business relationship, I do try to make myself a resource to anybody. When it comes to this, I like to preach the good word of climate. So I won't sell you too much, but do reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. That was fabulous. So I'm going to leave this up for one more second in case you want to scribble something down or take a screenshot. Reach out to us in the future. And then here it is. Get your phone out. Another QR code takes you to that survey that you can fill out for today only to get credit for learning with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you're watching the recording, you'll just need to take the quiz on PPAI Advanced. Stay tuned for when we get that up on there. You'll just search for the webinar title to find the course and take a little quiz. We promise it won't be too stressful. All right, I'll check in and see if there are any questions. I know we got a couple ahead of time that we can start with. Mike, I think this is a good one. I would love your opinion on. So we have a lot of companies in the merch space that are SMEs. They don't have a dedicated sustainability person or team. What do you think the first 1 or 2 practical steps are that they can take after measuring most impactful reduction? Like, do you think it's that freight? Do you think it's if I'm a small distributor and maybe my team has worked from home, I don't have a facility, like what would a tangible example be for you for something like that? No, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I like to think
Okay.
about it as building momentum. You can almost think of it as like akin to people that counsel on like how to get out of debt. So a lot of times when people get into debt, they have like a stack of different things, and like the most common sense, route is that you pick the thing with the highest interest rate and then you get rid of it, right? But sometimes those highest interest rates may be like the largest ones, and you're working really hard on that, right? We're human beings. We're just a bunch of like apes in suits pretending that like we, think all with our forebrain, but there's really that hindbrain that's doing a lot of the work. And I would say is get a quick win. The energy efficiency at your facilities is a quick win. Use that in order to start building momentum, get people excited about the process. And I think that's probably the easiest and first step that you should do. One, it's directly within your control. And two is it'll start to build people that are more interested and allied with what you're doing. In that process, you'll then be establishing the relationships and kind of the structures that you need in order to have like the bigger successes. Biting off your supply chain, that's a big one, right? Promotional products companies are already working a lot on kind of supply questions associated with this. This seems like another big thing. It can feel large and complex. So, that's where the biggest opportunity is, but it's also going to take the most time. The other, quick wins that we talked about there is like the things that I told you that don't cost you anything. Just start asking your suppliers about just questions. Whatever their answer is, just make them start thinking about it. One of the things I talk about a little bit is because we're all participating in like a kind of a global society and in a web where everybody is working on this. If you did exactly the same thing next year, your footprint's probably going to go down because all of your suppliers are also thinking about it too, right? So like the electric grid is decarbonizing. Your shippers are working on decarbonizing. So don't feel like you have to do it all yourself is the final thing I would say, which is that you're in this network of people that are all trying to do it, but you also have to be a teammate. You got to pull your load a little bit. So get started showing with everybody that you're on the same team, and then get going by, moving it from just questions and low hanging fruit to things that are more substantial.
I would add to something that you said that I think folks forget about often is celebrating those wins. Like, even if they're small, having the conversation gets people thinking about it, and then maybe they make one little change. Like, continue those conversations so that you can celebrate and uplift those wins. If you've got suppliers that are really working to lower their footprint or to take steps to show you that they're working towards it, really reward that and uplift it. I think that's a really big part of that continued progress, is just celebrating all the steps that you're taking, even if they're not immediate wins. It's like you said, transparency is so important to the younger generations around these efforts. And that is just going to keep showing up in, in RFPs, in conversations about new clients, and even hiring, I think is something that we hear a lot about. So last but not least, I did just want to include a quick shout out to our lineup of 2026 conferences. Again, I love QR codes in case you hadn't heard. Here's multiple for you. You can screen grab this to check them out at a future date. But registration is open now for NALC and our International Leadership Summit, as well as WLC, our Women's Leadership Summit Conference.
For everybody at home, I will be at both the North American Leadership Conference and the Responsibility Summit. So
yes.
If you thought I was entertaining on here, I'm even better in person.
Can confirm.
So there's that. And if you think I'm annoying here, then I will leave you alone at both of those two. But you should go.
You should definitely join us at those. I can confirm Mike is wonderfully entertaining in person. Many excellent dad jokes. Obviously aligns with my sense of humor. But with that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody for joining, and we look forward